hardships they encountered in the desert only served to toughen them into a strong fighting people that swept all before them in their first invasion of the land of Canaan. Israel was officially formed into a kingdom in 1020 BC by the prophet Samuel. And when the people clamored for a visible king to be like the surrounding nations, Samuel anointed Saul to be king over Israel. Although he defeated many of Israel's enemies, King Saul proved less of a decisive ruler than Samuel had hoped. Then there appeared in the story of Israel the young shepherd David. Saul was the people's choice, but David was God's choice, and he is anointed king over Israel by the prophet Samuel. Although often depicted as a little boy, David must have been well over 6 feet tall, as he was able to wear Saul's own armor. And Saul, as the Bible says, stood head and shoulders over the men of Israel. However, Saul's armor was too restrictive for David, and he politely refused it, and after felling the Philistine hero with a single slingshot, slew him with the giant's own sword, all of which stood him well with the people of Israel. Saul came to a humiliating end on Mount Gilboa, when he committed suicide there, accompanied by his faithful armor-bearer. David's reign over Israel was one of continuous successes against the surrounding nations, but in his later years, even David strayed from the path God would have had him take. His illicit affair with a beautiful Bathsheba earned him strong reproof from God's prophets. David was followed on the throne of Israel by his son Solomon, whose wisdom and leadership made the kingdom of Israel the most powerful and wealthiest nation in the Middle East at that time. So famous was Solomon that royalty from far distant countries came to see him, such as the Queen of Sheba. Her country was the present-day Yemen. However, total power invariably corrupts, and as the Bible records, Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord in the latter days of his reign. Solomon's fame and power proved irresistible to too many foreign women, and their admiration turned him from the true path of righteousness. He allowed them to sacrifice to their own pagan gods, neglecting the worship of the one true God of Israel. These are some of the household gods excavated in Palestine, dated of the time of Solomon. Moloch was one of the heathen gods of the Ammonites, and some of the people of Israel went so far as to even sacrifice their own children to this evil fire god. Thus far had Israel departed from the Lord, and his words to Solomon were grim in the extreme.
Forasmuch as thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee.
On the death of Solomon, his son Rehoboam ascended the throne. His very first act was to call all Israel to him at Shechem, of which little now remains but these ruins, to ratify his succession to the throne. Jeroboam, who had been a labor foreman under Solomon, asked the young king Rehoboam for assurances that the burden of heavy taxation would be made lighter. Northern Israel's demand was no taxation without representation. But this demand was angrily rejected. From this moment, the nation of Israel was divided into 2 separate kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. 10 of the 12 tribes refused to accept Rehoboam as king and elected Jeroboam, their spokesman, then crowned him king, who made his capital city Samaria, now a ruin, in the northern part of Israel. But 2 of the tribes accepted Rehoboam as their ruler and continued to live in and around Jerusalem, and together with the small tribe of Benjamin formed the southern kingdom of Judah. This is how the city would have looked at that time. The northern kingdom acquired the ancient Canaanite city fortress of Megiddo, where the people departed even further from the law of the Lord. To the distress of many of Israel's holy men, they allied themselves with the worship of Baal, Dagon, Ashtoreth, the mother goddess of Baal. Prophet after prophet warned Israel of the dire consequences of this idol worship, but these warnings fell on deaf ears. "We are weary of your warnings," said the people, and little by little, the morals of this once great nation began to deteriorate. And it was at this time that the prophet Elijah had a great and successful confrontation with the priests of Baal, and Israel once again returned to the Lord's way, for a time. But only too soon Israel returned to its old evil ways of idol worship, and a grim warning was issued by the prophet Elijah to the house of Jeroboam.
You have made yourselves other gods to provoke me to anger. Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will utterly sweep away the house of Jeroboam as a man sweeps away dung.
Yet it was not only Jeroboam's reign that was to come to a violent end. An even more grim prophecy foresaw Israel's end in Palestine by the Assyrian army by way of Elijah's stark warning.
Henceforth the Lord will smite Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and will root up Israel out of this good land which he gave to their fathers. And he will scatter them beyond the river Euphrates, because they have made their idolatrous symbols, provoking the Lord to anger.
Time after time, Israel was warned about their evil ways. Hosea was another prophet in the 8th century BC who foresaw the ultimate fate of the nation. He wrote,
And now they sin more, and make for themselves molten images, idols skillfully made of silver. They sacrifice to these.
In disgust, the prophet Hosea wrote,
Men kiss calves. Therefore they shall be like the morning mist, or like the dew that goes early away, like the chaff that swells from the threshing floor.
These heathen altars were discovered at Byblos on the Lebanon coast, and although not in Israel's own territory, they are similar to many put up in Israel's northern kingdom, and were a source of great distress to Israel's men of God. So despite the continual warnings from the prophets of Israel, the people had strayed far from the original concept of a special nation chosen by the Almighty to serve his purposes. Thus he used the Assyrians as a rod of chastisement for a long period of time, and he used other nations as well. This period is called in the Bible the 7 times punishment, which was to last 2,520 years, a period which ended about 200 years ago.
And the heathen shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they trespassed against me. Therefore I hid my face from them, and gave them into the hand of their enemies. So fell they all by the sword.
So the Assyrians came down like a wolf in the fold, and easily overran the armies of northern Israel. And many thousands were carried away into Syria as slave labor, and to act as buffer states on Assyria's borders against outside enemies. This invasion of Israel had a double purpose. For Assyria had long cast covetous eyes on the riches of Egypt, and only the now divided nation of Israel stood in their way, a nation now weakened and easy to plunder. The first deportation of Israel from Palestine came in 745 BC, when Tiglath-Pileser, or King Pul as the Bible calls him, led his army south and conquered much of the northern Israel, and most of the tribe of Manasseh, whose territory was on the east side of the river Jordan. The second book of Kings recorded that the army of Assyria transported large numbers of northern Israel as captives to Harlah and Habor and the Gozan area. The exact location of Habor is unknown, but Tel Halah, which existed as far back as 1500 BC, could well be the Halah of the Bible. Gozan could be the modern river Guzana, a small tributary of the Euphrates. Northern Israel was not only transported into what is now Syria, but also much further to the east, to Media, a country between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf. Tiglath-Pileser would have been surprised had he been told that his military conquests, recorded on clay tablets, would end up in the British Museum 2,500 years later. These tablets are part of the Royal Assyrian Annals and State. I received tribute from Menahem of Samaria. Like a lone bird he fled, then submitted to me. By this time, much of Israel's territory was under Assyrian domination. Israel was now a conquered people. The prophet's visions were now concrete reality. On his return from his attack on Egypt, the Assyrian king Sennacherib besieged the Israelite city of Lachish. This is part of its ruins. In his attack, he used the latest mechanized machines of war, such as siege towers and armored battering rams. His treatment of captured Israelites was cruel in the extreme. Sennacherib's account correlates Bible history in the book of Kings, which states, "And as for Hezekiah the Judean, who did not submit to my yoke, 48 of his strong walled cities I besieged and took, 200,150 people, male and female, horses, mules, asses, camels, cattle, and sheep without number. I brought away with him and counted them as spoil. Himself, like a caged bird, I shut up in Jerusalem, his royal city." What Sennacherib neglected to report was, he was unable to capture the city of Jerusalem itself. Mass deportation of populations was a common event in the centuries before Christ, as can be shown from tablets found in the ruins of Sargon II's palace, which stated, "I set siege to and conquered Samaria. I carried away into captivity 27,290 persons who lived there." Although this number would seem to indicate that only a portion of northern Israel was removed, Sargon stated in another inscription that he had taken all the people. This discrepancy was caused by Esarhaddon, who methodically defaced Sargon's deportation inscriptions. Thus, after 200 eventful years, the once great and powerful kingdom of Israel came to its end in 721 BC, the majority of its people having been carried away captive into Assyria and Media to become known as the Lost Tribes of Israel. For apparently these vast numbers of people had vanished from off the face of the earth. According to Josephus,
"There are but 2 tribes in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes are beyond the river Euphrates, an immense multitude, not to be estimated by numbers."
when Assyria in its turn fell to the now powerful forces of Babylon in 612 BC, it gave no comfort to the city of Jerusalem. And indeed, the Babylonians captured and sacked the city of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Most of the remaining inhabitants, together with King Zedekiah and the royal house of Judah, were all taken captive to Babylon, thus fulfilling God's warning to them, as recorded in the book of Leviticus, that they would receive the same treatment as the northern kingdom, which was already in exile. Eventually, Babylon itself fell to the Persians, and today is a ruin, a curiosity for passing visitors to see. After being held captive in Babylon for about 70 years, Cyrus the Persian, who had defeated the Babylonians, allowed the Judeans to return to their homeland, as recorded on this clay cylinder. While a few who enjoyed the life in Babylon stayed there, the vast majority, in groups and families, moved way up northwest up the course of the river Euphrates and never returned to Jerusalem. You will note now that the vast majority of both Israel and Judah are exiles in Assyrian territory, and no doubt many of those leaving Babylon will have joined them. Josephus the historian records some interesting facts about those of Israel who decided to return to Jerusalem. Only some 49,000 out of the original 600,000 people taken captive to Babylon actually returned. And with these expatriarchs came some Babylonians. Together with the Edomite element already in the city of Jerusalem, these